Recording's in progress, apparently. Thank you, Jane, and thank you everyone for coming today to participate in the launch of this fantastic book. This is what it looks like when yours arrive from Sydney and Adelaide. The book is authored by my dear friend Linda Rhodes. Linda waved. A few people walking through the door asked me who Linda was. They knew the name but hadn't seen Linda before. You may see Linda walking her dog Lily around Hyde Park from time to time. So if you see the Japanese Spitz, that's Linda attached to the dog. If at the end of today's launch, as Jane has said, you would wish to purchase a copy of the book, please speak to Jane, Linda, or myself. As a member of the LGBTIQ+ community, I consider that it is important that those from outside the rainbow community positively and actively participate in our journey as a group within broader society. I think you will find that Linda's book is an example of that, an inquisitive person's account of her introduction to the gay community and her research on it. The book discusses the history of same-sex relationships, the gay community's present-day culture, and some of the battles that gay men face in today's society. Before we dive headfirst into the launch and hearing from our very special guest speaker, I'd also like to sincerely acknowledge the people of the Noongar Nation, the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, and I pay my respects to Noongar elders past, present and emerging. I also acknowledge any First Nations people who may be with us today. As our guest speaker today is joining us from New South Wales, and noting the time difference between us, we are going to first hear from Mr. Kirby, before then hearing from Linda about the catalyst for her writing the book. There will also then be an opportunity for questions to be put to Linda, and we all know that responses to questions without notice can be quite juicy. So given there are a number of lawyers in the room today, I hope some pointy questions are put to Linda. There will then be an opportunity to network and speak with Linda more informally, so strap yourselves in. So as a lawyer myself, I'm delighted and privileged this afternoon to introduce as our guest speaker, the Honourable Michael Kirby. I wrote to Mr. Kirby on Wednesday to ask if there were any specific elements of his professional and or personal life that he would like me to mention when introducing him today. He responded soon after by suggesting that I keep my introduction of him to a minimum, and then provided a paragraph of not so insignificant life events. So, Mr. Kirby, thank you for largely writing my next paragraph for me, and I don't lie in saying I've plagiarised the whole lot. So here goes. Michael Kirby was Australia's longest serving judge when he retired from the High Court of Australia in 2019 after 13 years service in that court. Prior to that, he served in other Australian courts as an inaugural chairman of the Australian Law Reform Commission from 1975 to 1984. Both before and after his judicial service, he took part in a number of international activities, including as president of the International Commission of Jurists from 1995 to 98, and as special representative of the UN's Secretary General for Human Rights in Cambodia from 1993 to 96. In recent years, he served as chair of the UN Human Rights Council's Commission of Inquiry on North Korea, as a member of the Secretary General's high-level panel on access to essential medicines, and most recently as co-chair of the International Bar Association's Human Rights Institute from 2018 to 2021. When the HIV/AIDS pandemic hit Australia, he took part in many activities concerned with that crisis, which amounted to code language about his own sexual orientation. In 1998, he and his partner, Johan van Vloten, made their sexual orientation clear and beyond doubt. He was the first judge of a final national court to be openly gay. Since then, he has increasingly taken part in national and international activities to promote a more honest and scientific attitudes towards LGBTIQ status and to demand full equality for all sexual minorities. In 2019, he and his partner were married on the 50th anniversary of their relationship, which continues to this day. It is therefore with great pleasure that I hand you over to the Honourable Michael Kirby.
Thank you very much, Daniel Clark, for that introduction. I must say I detected a certain familiarity with some of the language of it, but it did demonstrate the fact that you and I would know from our experience, lawyers find it very difficult to be brief. And looking back, I think that introduction, which was supposed to be brief, was actually half of your speech. And I don't think that was an appropriate proportionality. However, thank you for being here, and thank you for speaking up for the LGBTIQ community, and especially in Perth, Western Australia. I gather you had a little rain there this morning. Maybe the Reverend Fred Nile has been praying for rain on your parade. I don't know whether that is so. He always did so most faithfully every year for the Mardi Gras, and once or twice he was rewarded. But over here in Sydney, it's pouring. But there's no excuse for you not to be out in large numbers to attend this wonderful book launch tonight. I thank Jane Seaton for having us at her bookshop, and I encourage you to take her advice. And if you can't lay your hands on Daniel's copy of the book, then you can hopefully put your name down. Now, there's no point coming to a book launch if you don't buy the book. There's no point in having famous book launches to launch the book if you come there and you drink up and nosh up and don't buy the book. The whole point is buying the book. And even though you won't get it, there is going to be a promissory order. You will be entitled to enforce that if you can afford the fees of the lawyer to take it in the event that you coughed up the money but haven't yet received the book. So you're pretty safe, I'd say, that if you put your name down and you give your moolah, then you will get the money, the book in the post as quickly as Australia Post can get it to you. And I want to acknowledge the presence of Linda Rhodes, who is the author of the book and who is going to be speaking after me. And I want to congratulate her warmly on her book. It's got a lovely cover, as you've been shown already by Daniel. It is all the colours of the rainbow on the front page. Dame Edna Everidge would say it's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's really magnificent. But I won't mention anything more about Dame Edna because she's my rival to be the top book launcher in the nation, which says something. It used to be Gough Whitlam, but he has gone to heaven and passed on his mantle to Dame Edna and me, and we are in a race to the death. But this one has fallen to me, and I'm very proud to launch Beyond the Rainbow, a study of what it really means to be gay. And in case I forget to say so at the end, the magic words are, I have much pleasure in launching this book. Now, the book is, as has been said, a composition which is an attempt by a person who is not gay to explain what being gay is really like. And that arose because when she was growing up, like most people, until quite recently, you would never know for sure that a person was gay because they were programmed and really enforced, often by the application of the criminal law, not to admit to their real identity. And that was the essence of the world into which I came, and which still exists in most parts of the world, and which has to change. What is truly astonishing is that it lasted for so long, but it had some pretty powerful interests that were in support of it. one of those powerful interests was the force of religion. And sadly, for those of us who've been brought up in a Christian belief, many of the most vigorous opponents were Christian by denomination and religion, and really nasty. They were really quite nasty in their attitudes towards sexual minorities, and still are. I mean, I was brought up in the Anglican tradition, and at least with the Anglicans, they are a global church which is having a conversation, in inverted commas, about the position of gay people within the church as priests and as bishops. And they have changed things. You know, over there in Perth, you, I think, were the first in Australia to ordain women in the Anglican Church. And that was a very good thing. And you've had a woman as Archbishop of Western Australia, of Perth, and that's a leadership which Western Australia has given in this matter. But the opposition of many churches, and including the Anglican Church, my own church in the Sydney diocese, has really been horrible. During the time of the attempt to get people to agree to the survey that was distributed before the House of Representatives got round to its duty to decide whether to support or oppose the marriage equality legislation, the Anglican Church coughed up $1 million to support the No campaign. And the Roman Catholic Church is also still opposed to it. Pope Francis, a very wonderful man and a reformer, has to be very careful. I sometimes wonder if he's got a poison tester for his food, that he's, because he's been really forthright in his personal views, but when it ever comes to the crunch, it's very hard to get from the Holy Father an actual written statement. It's things said in interviews on television or on radio and so on, but getting a formal change in a clear statement has been difficult, and that hasn't yet come. And so that's where we stand in this matter. So the step taken by Linda Rhodes to write this attempted explanation of what LGBTIQ people learn as they're growing up. How did this come about? How especially did it come about when, after the 1850s, scientists began to actually study this subject of human sexual variation, and explained in very clear language, repeatedly, strongly, and without really effective scientific contradiction, that this is simply one of the many variations in the human species, that variation in the human and other species is a natural thing. It is, in fact, a part and parcel of the whole phenomenon of evolution. And if you don't like it, you've just got to get over it, because it does happen, has happened, will happen. It won't be changed. People can't deny their sexuality. It is a living daily reality for every human being. The one unnatural form of human activity is celibacy. Human beings are programmed to seek love and sexual relations, not necessarily in that order. And this is a feature that is made clear in this book. Linda had a most unusual preparation for the writing of this book. She had a decent introduction to the issues and wrote a PhD on sociology, but her basic work in life was in nursing, which is a most honourable profession. My two brothers and I all became lawyers, but our sister became a nurse, and they are, as we all know who have had anything to do with medical care, they are wonderful and admirable and lovable. And you can't say that about all lawyers, unfortunately, but you certainly can say it about Linda. She has written her book really as a dialogue with herself to explain how she came to understand this phenomenon. It was introduced to her when she was young, because she had a relative, Murray his name was, who lived from 1936 to 2016, but who died at the age of 70, and who was gay, but was not really open about it. But that made her susceptible to finding out as much as she could, just because she was curious. People are curious about things. And how did the opponents of progress deal with that problem? Because curiosity would lead to an end to their isolation and discrimination against gay people. The deal that you had when I was growing up was very simple, very simple. We will leave you alone if you never make us confront the horrible reality that you are a human being who is sexually attractive to your own species. And this is what was enforced. It was enforced by colonial criminal laws, which we continued in force right up to my time in the judiciary, and which was enforced by a process of building up shame in human beings. And that shame was a very cruel way to alienate people from those that they love most, generally their family, their parents, their siblings, their grandmother. That was a subject that could not be mentioned. And that was the deal. And if you were quiet, there was no real problem. You were generally left alone, but you had to be very, very quiet. And the one person who was really hated was somebody who questioned and who criticized and who examined, and in a scholarly or non-scholarly way denounced this absurd and unscientific situation. And sadly, you know, it really is a sad thing that even to this day, there are people in our own country, but many, many people elsewhere in the world who are continuing that deal. Well, this book is one straight person's effort to put the understanding of society to rights. And the structure of the book is really quite straightforward. There are particular passages that take you through a basically chronological discussion of where sexual identity and sexual orientation came up earlier in history, going back to the Emperor Hadrian, the great builder, the builder in Rome and the builder of the wall at the north of Britain, and running through later famous and not so famous gay people, including Oscar Wilde, Dr. George Duncan, and Hollywood movie stars and others up to the present time, where there are 2 vignettes by gay Australians, and they are described so that we will understand the pain and unkindness that people had to go through in their lives until they got to liberation. And the fact that people did get to liberation was indicated pretty clearly in the vote for marriage equality, which was very strong in Australia, as it was earlier in Ireland, and as this week, just this week, it was in Switzerland. Switzerland took until, I think, the 1990s to give women the vote. So they are not a country, I mean, they make very good watches and other things, but they're not, shall we say, socially progressive. But this week in Switzerland, they at last took the plunge, and I think they're now the 32nd country in the world to enact or permit the enactment of laws for gay marriage. But that is a change that has happened, and it's illustrated in other stories through the book. Many of them are the stories of the people who were important in my own journey. For me, Stonewall was not really a key event. For me, what was a key event was the Kinsey Report, because the Kinsey Report on sexual orientation in the human male came out in 1944 when I was 4 or 5. And I can't say at that age I was actually poring over every word of Alfred Kinsey's book. I was a precocious little child, I'll agree to that, but I didn't sit there at the age of 5 reading Kinsey's full book. But it hit the headlines, you see, and it was scientific, and it demonstrated that very large numbers of people in their lives have a homosexual sexual experience. And that really undermined the notion that this was something that willful people, a tiny, tiny minority, embraced just to be nasty and to upset their grandmother. And they shouldn't have done it. And that was the way that was enforced. Well, that started to break down with Alfred Kinsey. And in her book, Linda has gone before Kinsey and after Kinsey to demonstrate the science. She comes to a view that there are probably about 10% of members of any community and of our community who are themselves gay. And it all depends a bit on your definition and whether you're defining people who are lifelong gay and don't have any other sexual fantasy or attraction, or people who have occasional flashes of an unsettling fantasy of a homosexual kind. Myself, I think 10% for exclusive gay people is probably a bit of an overstatement. But whether it's 10% or 7%, as Stonewall in the UK suggests, or a smaller number, is really beside the point. The point is that it's a proportion of our fellow citizens. So get used to it and get over it and stop being nasty to LGBTIQ people. And that is the purpose that inspired Linda to write the book. She did so after, in her work in the mining industry, she discovered a person who came out to Australia, and all he seemed to bring with him were his bike and very short shorts, which she was interested in because he'd wrapped up all the essential parts, not of his person, but of the bike with his short shorts. and he couldn't wait to get onto his short shorts and meet somebody he'd met on Grindr back in Ireland. And this mildly surprised Linda, because how can I put this? The mining industry is not made up, or at least at that time was not made up, of a very large number of strong supporters of marriage equality and of equal dignity for gay people. It had one or two who were hostile. I know you won't find that easy to believe, but they were. And Linda was really, I think she was taken aback that here was, contrary to her relative Murray, somebody who in his own circle was just not ashamed. He was out for a good time and for happiness and friendship, and if he was lucky, love. And so I think that that really is the motivation. And she thought, well, now, if this is so, why do we have this hostility and why do we have this shame? And she then embarked upon a book which is a mixture of scientific data plus vignettes and stories of human beings' lives, because that's a really important way that we champion human rights. The way in Australia we've championed the rights of Asian Australians is we began to meet them, and some of them were cleverer than we were, and that was how we changed our attitude. The way we're in the process of changing our attitude to Aboriginal Australians is we've begun to meet them and we've begun to acknowledge them, and that's the way you change people's false hatreds. And the way you change the attitude to LGBTIQ people is you begin to know them as colleagues, family members, friends, and it's very hard to hate people once you get to know them. And this is Linda's theory in writing her book. Now, there, you know, a good book launcher like Dame Edna and I will always go through very carefully to try and find some typos, because this is a sign that you're not just a one-speech pony who, pretending to launch a book, speaks instead of yourself. I don't want to be unkind, but Mr. Whitlam was occasionally wont to do that when he was launching a book. But it is important to try to show that you've read everything in the book by pointing out to two mistakes. I think on page 73, it's almost in a footnote, there is a suggestion that the Rand government had moved sometime early in the 1970s to change the law in New South Wales. Well, actually, it didn't happen until 1984. I have reason to know about that. But that may just be a matter of my over-punctilious reading of the text in order to find my error, that I can prove that I've read the whole thing so very carefully. The second is a point of science, and it is a suggestion that through some process of the evolutionary rule, gay people have the biggest penises. Now, I hope you understand that when I read that, I only looked at it twice from a purely scientific point of view. I had no other interest in the theory than the fact that this was asserted. And I suppose behind the suggestion was that evolution is going to knock out gay people who don't have big penises because they won't get chosen. But I have to point out that the size of the penis has not got very much to do with the reproduction, and that the reproduction is the obstacle, which is an obstacle that is now being overcome by a lot of gay people in having their own children. And I can tell you, not from any scientific study, but just from worldly experience in baths, to swimming pools and so on, when I was a young man, seeing gay people have neither bigger nor smaller penises. They are absolutely average size. Some are big, some are small, and that's just the truth of the matter. And if there's any doubt about that scientific fact, you can consult Daniel Clark later for a second opinion. In the law, we always have a second opinion, and he will give you his impression of that statement. But they were the only two little errors that I found in what is otherwise an impeccable book of history, an impeccable book of sociology, and an impeccable book of science. And that's what the whole business is all about: history, sociology, science. And when you get over your hobgoblins and misreadings of biblical texts and hatred and discrimination against people so that you can put them down and advance yourself, and you begin to remember the central messages of most religions, and certainly of the Christian religion, of loving God and loving one another, when you get back to those fundamentals, then the message that is put forward by Linda Rhodes is uncontradictable. It is a message of love and respect for dignity, and that's why this is a good book. And to the extent that it helps straight people to understand the lives and sometimes the suffering of LGBTIQ people, sexual minorities, it will be a contribution to a very just cause. And I, as a citizen of this country, want to thank Linda Rhodes for her work in writing the book. I want to thank the bookshop for putting on this exhibition. I feel a bit hurt that I'm not over there tucking into the champagne and the canapes, which I hope are copious and generous. And I also want to thank Daniel Clark and Morris Blackburn, an excellent firm of lawyers, for coming along to keep this matter under control and to restrain the launcher from making inappropriate comments about delicate matters. But with these few words of praise and exaltation, I launched the book, and I do urge you all to buy it and to give support to Linda Rhodes for her enterprise in producing this book. And it's her attempt to explain how she came to wisdom, and the coming of wisdom is the goal of every rational human life. So thank you very much. The book is launched, and I now will stand by and silently watch the rest of this proceeding unfold in the way that has become so customary to us by Zoom link. Don't forget me over there in Perth. I still exist, and I still want to get invitations to Perth, real invitations. When the planes are flying, I will be there. And if you have a book, I will launch it, so long as it doesn't have any inappropriate matters in it. Thank you.
Mr. Kirby, I think the round of applause from everybody here today demonstrates the appreciation that our community here out west has for you as a leader in both our legal and LGBTIQ communities. We are very grateful for your willingness to speak at events such as this. So sincerely, thank you. Feel free to listen in on the remainder of today's launch, and I will be sure to keep proceedings under control, as you have mentioned. But without further ado, now to the author of the hour, Dr. Linda Rhodes. I'll introduce you, Linda. All right, ready to go. Linda grew up in Melbourne. Linda has previously told me that when she was a child, her family cheered for the Melbourne Football Club VFL team. I hope you watched the grand final on Saturday,
I did.
although I suspect you didn't.
I did.
You did? Oh, well, all right, okay. Did they win?
Yeah.
Well done. Linda attended Canterbury Girls' School, where she was a Year 12 prefect and vice captain of the school hockey team. Linda came from a family of teachers and was herself determined to do something else with her life. The only other real choice of profession for women at that time was nursing, and so Linda embarked on a career in nursing and midwifery. Linda then took off overseas and with people in North America for a year, looking after their health as an on-site nurse. She then travelled through communist Poland and Russia. Both were very, very forbidding at the time. She subsequently returned to Australia, where she met her late husband, Mike. Over the next 25 years, and initially with a young family, Linda moved from mining town to mining town with Mike. Mike worked in the mining industry. During that time, she ran the medical centre in Teutonic Bore, which sounds like something they ride around on in Middle Earth, for 2 years, and was responsible for the health and welfare of the whole workforce and community. Upon returning to Perth, Linda had to start again. She commenced her studies in psychology and eventually achieved a PhD in sociology. Her thesis was published as a book, itself a story of how the mining industry expects wives to work for them, but not pay them. Following periods in Mexico and Nevada, USA, Linda took a role as a native English speaker at a university in Poland. Her husband, Mike, was at the time working in Siberia. Linda then returned to Perth and through a further chain of events, met a charismatic young man who, after knowing him for some time, told her that if she, Linda, did not know that he was gay by that stage, she must be the most naive person on the planet. I understand that this comment was the catalyst for Linda authoring the book. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Linda Rhodes to discuss her book, Beyond the Rainbow.
Thank you, Daniel. It was Dan who told me I must be the most naive person on the planet. I wasn't sure how to respond to this, but just in case he was right, I went home and did some research. It was just for my own information to start with, but then it was so interesting, it just grew into a book. In 2019, the gay community celebrated the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall Riots, an insurrection of minimal proportions, but one which served to mobilise the community and a generation of activists who in a few decades would radically alter the world in which gay men lived. The social changes which resulted have been profound. After years of marginalisation and detachment from mainstream society, gay men can now experience a high degree of freedom and social acceptance. Instead of hiding behind walls of shame and fear, they could finally celebrate and take pride in their distinctiveness, contributing in the process to a world that increasingly seeks not to abolish difference, but to accept and appreciate it. So as I started my research, I knew that the gay world had improved. When I asked people what they knew about homosexuality, it tended to be limited to three things: the rainbow flag, the Mardi Gras, and AIDS. Even if I was the most naive person in the world, I could see there was a warped picture developing, if that's all that anybody knew. Secondly, I spoke to the mother of a young gay man who told me how her son's coming out had turned her world upside down. What did we do wrong, she said. What? We were just a young couple who got married and had a baby. How come he's gay? She didn't know. She hadn't been able to find out. She went to her GP. He had no idea either. So there was clearly a lack of understanding still. About the same time, I received news about my cousin Murray. I never met Murray. He was, after all, gay, and my family was not very welcoming of anybody gay, let alone a cousin. So I didn't ever meet him. He was a lot older than I was too, so our paths never crossed. In 1980, Murray and his partner James bought a hobby farm near Mansfield in the Victorian Alps. Several years later, Murray was there alone, sound asleep at night, when he was woken by a tremendous crash and was confronted by a maniac wielding an axe handle. The stranger proceeded to bash him severely, shouting as he hit him, "Die, you fucking poofter." So how did this fit in with this new celebration of being gay that came out of Stonewall? It didn't. But his story didn't end there either. He'd recover. He had 42 fractures of his spine, but he did recover. And he and James moved to Melbourne, where they bought an apartment in an upmarket block of flats in North Melbourne. And then they put up a rainbow flag. And then they were taken to court. The body corporate didn't allow rainbow flags. So they were taken to court, and that's where I caught up with Murray. Very quickly, there was a petition online and 6,000 people had signed it in support of Murray. And the Human Rights Law Centre volunteered their time free. So I haven't been able to find out what happened, but I expect because of the support, they got off. But these three gay stories didn't seem to fit with what the popular view was, that things were easier for gay people now. So this lack of understanding, as far as I could see, would only keep leading to fear, and fear leads to aggression. And so I began to research and write, and it turned into the most interesting research I've ever done. It still puzzles me that the gay community represents itself through three things: the rainbow flag, the Gay Pride March, and AIDS. 2 out of 3 attract a little bit of angst from the mainstream community. Why do they do it? Why do they advertise themselves in such a limited way when they are such a diverse community and a wonderful community? So I hope they read the book. I think that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Linda. All right, it's question time. All right, so I hope you've been brewing up your questions for Linda. I don't have one just yet, but I'm going to listen to what other people say, because I've read the book. Does anyone have any pointed questions to put to Linda about the book? You might just determine whether you buy a copy or not.
What about the book that I'd like to ask Linda what next?
Maybe just repeat the question, just so that others can hear.
Moira is just asking what's next. I do think there needs to be somebody needs to write on the psychology of being gay. I'm not a psychologist, so I steered clear of psychology. But I think there are some interesting characteristics that unite. Oh, don't look like that. And it would be very useful. But I won't be doing it. I think you're a psychologist, aren't you?
Linda, can I ask a question? You spoke about the mother with the son who is gay. What would you expect of the doctor have said to, from what you know now?
Oh, from what I know now, he should give her my book. I think, yes, he should have known more than he obviously did. Maybe they don't study homosexuality as part of a medical course, but I think doctors have just as much misinformation as the rest of the community, and that needs to be changed. I think people need to know that gay people are not freaks or oddities or anything like that. They're normal people. I read something yesterday online. Heterosexuality is not normal, it's just common. And I think we have to start thinking differently.
Linda, I have been very fortunate to read your book, and I was fascinated by the research you've done and in awe of what you put into this book. And I just wondered, did you get a great deal of joy and excitement in your voyage of sort of discovery and putting together the fabric of the history of the gay movement?
I didn't know much about the history of the gay movement. Well,
not so much the gay movement is, I mean, it's been moving through history, and we've reached the point now where we are reading your book.
Yeah.
But did you enjoy your research?
Yes. Yes. It's the most interesting research I've ever done. Now, I just hope that it brings some joy to somebody who might be struggling, because I think there still are young men struggling.
Your word joyful was good, because it gave me a feeling of joy that practice is the beginning of understanding.
Yes, I hope so. A lot of research has been done now on homosexuality, particularly in men. But I think there's a lot more that needs to be done. I hope my book is just a beginning rather than an end. There have been all sorts of theories. Some of the science is ridiculous. I wasted several weeks getting up close to young men and looking at the back of their head, because somebody had done research on how the curls of hair turn one way if you're gay and the other way if you're not.
Well, I'm glad it was the hair you were looking at.
It was a lot easier when I came to being left-handed. Why are gay men more often left-handed? It seems extraordinary. But I peer at people now every time I see a left-handed person. I look again to but as I've said somewhere, you know, left-handedness used to be a problem. Children were smacked on their hand if they wrote with the left hand, until eventually it got to the point where people realized it's just human diversity. Some people write with their left hand, some people with their right. And so the research stopped. Well, I think we have to get to that point too with homosexuality. Okay, some people are, some people are not.